Good stuff. Well, thanks very much for agreeing to take my presentation today. Really nice to see everybody. For those that I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet, my name is Matthew Oakey, and I head up the aerial survey team at Historic England, which is the government's statutory advisor on the historic environments. So I'm going to talk to you about the Downs from Above project today, which is part of a wider project called Changing Chalk. So Changing Chalk is a programme of 18 individual projects being delivered by 12 partner organisations and led by the National Trust, which is the largest conservation charity in Europe. It's being supported by a £2.23 million a grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund and also People's Postcode Lottery and the Limbury Trust. It started last year in April, and it's running over 4 years altogether. So we've got another couple of years to run on the project. The broad aim of the project, to quote the National Trust website, is to unite nature, people and heritage and create a more sustainable future for the Downs and their towns. So projects straddle the natural environment and also the historic environment, and they're grouped under 3 themes of restoring chalkland biodiversity, connecting Downs and towns, and the hearts and histories of the Downs. So Historic England is the delivery partner for one of these projects, which is the Downs from Above project. So this sits under the hearts and histories of the Downs theme. So our contribution so far has been mapping of 192 square kilometres of the South Downs, immediately to the north of the urban conurbation of Brighton and Hove. So following the mapping, we've delivered an interactive online GIS portal that I'll talk to you about shortly. And we're just entering the next stage of the project, which is delivery of training to local communities and volunteers. So just to give you a bit of a background to the South Downs more generally. So the South Downs, you can see in the shaded area down there, in the south of England, covering Hampshire and Sussex. So they cover an area of just over 1,500 square kilometres, from Winchester in the west through to the cliffs of Beachy Head in the east. Much of this landscape is nationally designated as a national park, and it's the newest national park in the UK. It wasn't formed until 2009. And the Changing Chalk project area is encompassing that eastern area that I've outlined there in red. Our aerial mapping project was just a subset of that, because we'd actually already mapped the areas to the east and west of it. So we've now got this really interesting contiguous landscape. The Downs form a very rich and diverse landscape, both in terms of natural habitats, but also in terms of archaeology. So the landscape that we see today really began to be shaped around 6,000 years ago when Neolithic farmers started clearing the land and cultivating and settling it. Over the following millennia, the Downs were transformed into very species-rich grassland. However, since the Second World War, unmanaged pasture has declined by around 80% nationally, and now only about 4% of the national park itself is managed in this way. Now, a significant shift in land management really began during the Second World War. There was increased pressure to produce food, and this continued through into the post-war period. So this is where we see large parts of the Downs being ploughed up. So we have the traditionally managed grassland being ploughed up and turned over to arable agriculture. So while many sites do actually survive as earthworks in this landscape, aerial survey, both in terms of aerial photography, historic photography, modern photography, and very importantly lidar, is really, really integral to unlocking this landscape. So just a quick run through the results of the project before we look at a couple of the very interesting developments that have come from the mapping. So as with many of the projects that we do, this maps a very rich variety of archaeology from the Neolithic right through to the Cold War military remains. Rather than talk about everything in this landscape today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus, if I can find my pointer, on one individual site which is just over there, which is an Iron Age hill fort known as the Devil's Dyke Hill Fort. And this really encapsulates the history of the Downs with this one individual site in its immediate hinterland. So this is the Devil's Dyke Hill Fort. So you can see it's the Hashard earthwork site here. So everything that you see in the green colour is a cut feature. Everything that you see in the red colour is an embanked feature. So traces of Bronze Age settlement and land division are scattered throughout the Downs, and this includes a small number of settlements, but also a site type called cross-ridge dykes, which divide the natural spurs of land in between the dry valleys. But most commonly are the Bronze Age in this particular locality is really defined by the surviving Bronze Age round barrows and levelled round barrows. So we've recorded about 250 round barrows in this particular area. Many of these were known before, but we have actually uncovered new Bronze Age round barrows during the course of the project. One such barrow cemetery lies immediately to the south of Devil's Dyke Hill Fort. So this was one that initially came up on the lidar. It actually sits within the area of an extant golf course, and there's also various disturbance, particularly wartime and post-war disturbance here. So it's kind of understandable how these earthworks may have been overlooked and confused with other features in the past. But it was actually the historic vertical photography that really confirmed our interpretation as round barrows, because we picked up the ring ditches around these showing up as crop marks. Now, the large defensive rampart parts of the hill fort were constructed during the Iron Age, and what appears to be a potential internal division we think could actually be one of these previous cross-ridge dykes that's just come enclosed by the hill fort. But the hill fort, we can now see, actually sat within a very, very intensively occupied and utilised landscape. And so this was extensively farmed during the Iron Age and Roman periods, and the lidar in particular in this landscape has been absolutely integral to us understanding and unpicking this. So what we've been able to do is to piece together all of these previously known fragments of field systems, as well as newly identified fragments of field systems, to reveal these very, very large, extensive, contiguous landscapes. And that's just the site of Devil's Dyke Hill Fort there, to put it into context. So to the southeast of the hill forts, we can see these two large depressions. And these are the remains of dew ponds. And dew ponds were man-made ponds that were used to collect water for livestock in the chalk, very freely draining chalk geologies. Now, dew ponds are a very, very characteristic feature of this landscape. They really are part of the landscape character in this part of the South Downs. And they're testament to the value of sheep, not only for meat and wool, but also for manuring the arable fields. And there is evidence of dew ponds being constructed as far back as the Bronze Age, but most of the dew ponds in the South Downs Park that we mapped as part of this project really date to a post-medieval phase of this landscape's use. We also have various other depressions in the area which very often relate to digging for chalk, so this could be both for building and also agricultural improvement as well. Now, from the mid-18th century, Sussex started to become a landscape of leisure for the wealthy residents of the capital. And the coastal towns of Brighton, which was, as we saw, just immediately below the South Downs, below the Downs from above area, was even the location of a seaside pleasure palace known as the Brighton Pavilion, which was built for King George IV. And later, the expanding railway network attracted day trippers and holidaymakers to the Sussex countryside and the coast in ever-increasing numbers. So the Devil's Dyke Hotel that we see here was originally built in 1831. And in 1890, the entire Devil's Dyke estate was purchased by H.J. Hubbard, who created an adventure park on the hill fort. Attractions included a roller coaster, a bicycle railway, a zoo, and even, for some reason, a 7-inch replica naval gun. For the more adventurous, an aerial ropeway transported tourists across the Devil's Dyke ravine in a metal cage which was strung between 2 pylons. Really quite a bonkers landscape. So all of these features have since been demolished, but we can still pick out traces of some of these, particularly in the lidar data. So the circular feature there, this is where you had motorbikes that were on a kind of fixed rail and you could just go around in a circle. A funicular railway going up to the site, and then this is where the location of the 2 pylons either side with the aerial ropeway going across the Devil's Dyke ravine. During the First World War, there was a large military presence on the Downs. So this included a very, very significant camp and associated training facilities. And in 1918, the hill fort became the location of the Brighton bomb testing station. And traces of the aerial ropeway from which the bombs would have been dropped can be traced on aerial photographs. And we've even got potential craters from the bomb testing visible in the lidar. And during the Second World War, having lain dormant for around 2 millennia, the Devil's Dyke Hill Fort once again took on a defensive role. Its strategic location led to it being one of several defended localities on the Downs, which would help defend against the German invasion from the southeast coast. So we can pick out various barbed wire entanglements across the ramparts. Now, over the past few decades, towns like Brighton have seen a renaissance, once again attracting very wealthy residents from London to live or holiday. But the wider Changing Chalk project area has some of the most economically deprived wards in the UK, with high unemployment, poor physical health and poor mental health. And the link between heritage and well-being is something that is becoming increasingly acknowledged in the UK and also in Europe more widely. And so this is really one of the underlying themes to all of the Changing Chalk projects. And heritage's contribution to well-being is very, very broad. So this can range from the physical, mental and social benefits of being involved in heritage-related activities through to enriched place of sense and enriched sense of identity and belonging that the historic environment can provide. And recent work by Historic England has established a framework for considering the relationship between heritage and well-being in 6 ways. So heritage as a process. So this is the kind of thing that is often associated with heritage-focused volunteering projects. Heritage as participation. This is supported by a large body of research which indicates that cultural engagement is linked to well-being. Heritage as a mechanism is really about shared experiences and development of new connections, which can contribute to social cohesion. Heritage as healing touches on various assessments of patients and the handling of museum objects, which have revealed a number of benefits such as thinking, meaning-making, self-esteem and positive interactions. Heritage as place is really about place shaping. So this is about ensuring that local people have a voice, they feel empowered and they feel a sense of belonging. And finally, heritage as environment. So this is something where there's definitely still research to be done, but it's really looking about those aspects of and understanding what characteristics of a place best promote well-being. So I think in previous sessions we've talked about the Aerial Archaeology Mapping Explorer that was launched a couple of years ago. And so this gave access to over 30 years of mapping data. And it really showed what an engaging medium aerial archaeology can be for the general public. There was an absolutely huge reception at the time and interest still remains. And so what we wanted to do in collaboration with the National Trust was to build on that when it came to the Downs from Above project. So our internal communications team have now twigged that anything that has an aerial photo attached to it always runs as a story. So we were lucky to get good BBC News coverage on the TV and the radio, amongst other outlets. So this is the GIS portal that we developed. So very much building on what we learned from the Aerial Archaeology Mapping Explorer. So it's a way to disseminate information, so people can take this, they can view this information on a computer or on an electronic device, and they can look at what we've mapped, But very importantly, they can actually add their own data. So we've got two forms that people can add to. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got a form where they can add their own memories, their own comments, their own photos, and interestingly, even looking at how this place makes them feel. On the right-hand side of the screen, they can contribute to monitoring. So this is a concept of micro-volunteering. So it could just be somebody walking their dog up on the downs, for example, who's walking over archaeology that they can now see on their mobile phone, and they can report issues with the site. So a really interesting way of engaging people. And the next stage that we're looking at is incorporating historic landscape characterization data. So we're really interested in how having access to historic environment data actually changes people's perceptions of landscape and the values that they place upon it. And we're now moving into the next stage of the project, which is where we're going to be working with local volunteers to deliver training. Some of the local volunteers are actually with established groups, so it's very much an audience that we're dealing with already, but also with the support of the National Trust through their Find Your Future program. We're also engaging with 16 to 24-year-olds who are not in education, employment, or training, known by I don't really like the acronym NEETs, but that's what it's known about in government circles. So engaging with an audience that we've really not engaged with, and hopefully just creating that spark of interest in them, and maybe showing them that there is a career that they possibly didn't even know existed. So finally, that leads us on to alternative career paths. So promoting inclusion, diversity and equality in the wider sector and our own organisation is a corporate priority for Historic England. And our involvement in the Changing Chalk project has actually enabled to take our first steps towards this. Because part of the funding, part of the earned income that we got from the project, we've used to fund a level 3 apprenticeship, who's Jackie Ann, who started with us a few months ago. Becoming involved in the apprenticeship scheme is something that I've personally been very, very passionate about for the past few years. And so this has really been our way in. And also, rather fantastically, this has actually spurred a second level 3 apprentice who's centrally funded by Historic England, who just joined us a couple of weeks ago. All employers in the UK with a payroll of more than £3 million pay what's called the apprenticeship levy. So this is basically a pot of money that can be drawn upon to pay for apprenticeship training. Some employers just treat it as a tax and write it off. So at present, there are 2 levels of archaeological apprenticeship in the UK. So the level 3, which is very much aimed at entry level. So it gives you basically the equivalent of the A-level archaeology that Adam was talking about. So these can be people that have absolutely no experience in archaeology. And then the level 7 apprentice, which is generally aimed at people either with a degree in archaeology or those with some form of professional experience. And I think that apprenticeships are actually really, really key to diversifying people's entry into archaeology in general, but also in terms of aerial remote sensing. And I think it is a really, really important strand that we begin to think, how can we broaden our reach away from those people who have what is increasingly a very, very privileged position of being able to do a formal university education. So this can be for social reasons, it can be for monetary reasons, and the kind of reasons that Adam talked upon about where formal university education just isn't for everybody. So these are 2 of our apprentices. We haven't had time to get a photo of Chloe yet. So we've got Jackie Ann in the top left-hand side of the screen there, doing some excavation at Bergdolswald Roman Fort upon Hadrian's Wall. So she started with the aerial survey team, and over the course of 18 months, will work her way around all of the archaeological investigation teams that we're associated with. So hopefully giving her a really holistic idea of archaeology, but also very importantly, how airborne remote sensing fits into that suite of investigative techniques. And very, very excitingly, we've actually used the level 7 apprenticeship as a recruitment tool. So this is Robin, who is our new aerial investigator doing the flying in the north of England. So Robin's apprenticeship will be for 3 years. She'll come out of it with an MA in archaeological practice. So 80% of her time on the job, 20% with the academic provider. and then will be our full-time reconnaissance post in the north. So that's me done. So thank you very much for listening.